ودي لي سلامي يا رايح للحرم وادعي لي وسلم لي.
Assalamu alaikum everyone, and welcome to another podcast by the Muslim Interlude. Today I have disturbed brother Ziyad from his sleep. As you can tell, he's in Australia at the moment, so we're 11 hours behind. Oh, he's 11 hours ahead. We've just had a discussion about this and we was all wrong. So yeah, he's 11 hours ahead. But we've got brother Ziyad today, who has kindly woken up for us at after clock on a Sunday morning at 6 a.m. or 7 a.m. is it in Australia at the moment. And we're going to talk a little bit about mental health. He's an accredited mental health educator within his area of profession, and he worked, or did work anyway, for a company called Educade. But you told me you moved jobs, so what's the situation with that?
Yeah, Jazakallah khair, Brother Ismail. Assalamu alaikum, everyone, and thank you for welcoming me on the show. So I've actually taken up a new role as an education consultant with the largest youth mental health organization in Australia, as well as maintaining the work we do with Educade. So it's an additional kind of role that I've taken up in the mental health space.
Wow, I don't think you could get any busier, to be honest, and you still managed to find time for this. So it's not you've not moved jobs; it's an alternative to what you was doing.
Correct. Yep. So it's broadening the scope, I guess, in the space. The space is very vast, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done. So I guess using my background in education and my experience working within schools to, I guess, take on a different kind of challenge. And I guess that was those opportunities really did open up because of what we've been doing with Educade here in our local, I guess, community in Australia.
Educade is local, then I'm guessing. Educade, or is it for the majority?
To be honest, it went international accidentally. I'll explain that in a second. So our aim with Educade is to increase mental health literacy and awareness within culturally and linguistically diverse communities, and we do that through mental health education. That's our scope in terms of where we function. It was actually an opportunity in March last year where we're actually invited to the One Path studio here in Sydney. I'm sure you guys have heard of One Path.
Yeah, I've heard of One Path. Yeah.
One of the leading Islamic media channels who have like millions of people following them, and they have an international reach. So I was invited for a podcast, and it kind of the producers kind of snipped up some sections from the podcast and released them. And we had people messaging us from all over the world because of that, alhamdulillah, because we touched on, I guess, the two clips that went viral were about very pertinent issues affecting Muslims, and it was just through my limited experience, what I shared, it struck a chord. So the first clip was about Islam and faith. Sorry, not Islam and faith, Islam and mental health. Is there a contradiction or not? And then there was also a clip which was released on World Suicide Day, or World Suicide Prevention Day in 2020, and kind of sharing my experience through that as well. It was a good opportunity to engage. Oh, yeah, awesome, alhamdulillah.
I saw that.
And what did you think?
I can't say anything to you on camera now. We'll talk. I'm joking. Allahumma barik. No, it was really good. I saw the two ideas which I got from, actually, when I spoke to someone else about mental health in a couple of podcasts ago, and I watched that, and I actually touched up on them two subjects with the speaker himself. I think it is, do you know Bilal Zia from America?
I've heard of Brother Bilal, but I don't know him personally.
Okay, Allahumma barik is an amazing speaker. He's a PhD student, and it was the first podcast we did with himself, actually, and it was really good. So I mentioned them two topics with him purely because I got that idea from the two videos I saw of yours.
Oh, I'm glad it had an impact, alhamdulillah. That's awesome.
It did. It was really good. It was very beneficial. As always, as all mental health topics go, to be honest, there's always somebody out there that needs to hear something. That's why we even do this. The podcast and stuff. The first podcast we did was mental health, actually.
No, it's amazing that you guys are, you're broadening the conversation in the context of young adults.
Yeah, I think as we call them. Yeah, it's a conversation that needs to be had. So, what was your journey? Let's get into it a little bit. What was your journey into into the mental health side of things? Because from right, I don't think you started off your career as within the mental health field.
That's right. Yeah, alhamdulillah. And so I guess part of my discovery into adulthood was recognizing my passion for the well-being space. So I finished school actually not wanting to be anything other than a pharmacist because of, I guess, the expectations that were placed on me by my parents, who obviously come from an ethnic background. So I guess, it was up until my early uni days where I actually came to the realization that I wanted to become a teacher. So I was tutoring on the side. I wanted to become a teacher. And the journey went from there, actually. And then getting into my first gig as a teacher at a department, so at a public school here in Australia, in southwest Sydney, where there's a high population of multicultural communities, in particular refugees. So in 2018, I was part of a mental health literacy program within the school where I was, leading the project to roll out mental health first aid training, which is a standardized evidence-based program developed by Mental Health First Aid Australia. So I was responsible for leading the program, and at the same time, I had the opportunity to upskill as an instructor. And I guess rolling out the program, just before that, I had gone through the program myself as an early career teacher, and then becoming trained and rolling out the training to the students at the school and teachers as well. I realized that it was such an invaluable set of skills that people should have, not just within a school setting, but across community settings as well. And that's where I came together. At the time, it was one other person, so one of the co-founders, Yahya, and we decided to put something together, just something small. We started off as a for-profit kind of initiative where we just wanted to roll out training and just to kind of see how, the community responded to that, and not just the Muslim community, mind you, but the broader community in Sydney. So from there, we had a few other team members join on board, and then I guess, it just went from there, alhamdulillah. So we started rolling out trainings, being part of the Muslim community. A lot of the trainings that we've run and continue to run actually have been targeted or have been, I guess, booked by Muslim groups and organizations, masajid. And we've, alhamdulillah, we've established ourselves and built a presence in that regard.
How was it taken by the people? Not the teachers or the imams or the institutes you went, but by the people who were receiving or saw this new sort of education program within the mental health or first aid mental health. It's different to what they were guessing they were used to. They hadn't seen it before. How did they receive that?
Sure, brother. So a lot of these programs, a lot of the issues with a lot of the, I guess, mainstream mental health organizations is the lack of access they have to CALD communities, and that includes Muslim communities as well. So it was, having someone like ourselves who come from an Islamic background, come from cultural backgrounds, go in and start to roll out the awareness. It was really well received. And I don't just say that willy-nilly. We collect data, 99% of the programs we roll out, whether it's just one-off seminars or it's, courses that go for days, we try to evaluate the way it was received. And overwhelmingly, the responses have been, that of it being positive. We've had people come up to us and say, whether it's opening up to us about their own struggles or the struggles of someone that's near to them. We've had individuals, want to pursue a career in mental health based on, some of the courses that they've completed with us. So, yeah, it's been an exciting journey, and to be honest, it's kind of kept us afloat. And it's, sometimes when we're going through that, a bit of downtime, hearing those stories come through kind of really picks us up again in terms of our motivation. Alhamdulillah. So it's been excellent. I guess in the early days I must confess, there was a bit of hesitancy when it came to, I guess, entering the space as non-mental health professionals. It felt like we were encroaching on the space. So there was, I guess, a bit of insecurities, and we weren't kind of, I guess, specifically amongst Muslim audiences, Muslim professionals. I don't think we were really well received with open arms. It's just another, people trying to take over, how we enter into space that they're not qualified in. But over time, we've actually made it clear that, we know where our boundaries are. We don't operate as a service. We don't offer therapy. We merely go in, create that awareness, want to create that change on a grassroots level in the psychoeducation space. So yeah, that's been it's
So you
been
don't call yourself
journey.
a psychologist then?
No, I don't call myself a psychologist.
Oh,
we
okay.
call ourselves
Educators.
We call ourselves educators. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I can see the difference. I can see why they're both needed. So you've got the psychologists you can then refer them to, and you've got the educators who educate the lay people basically on how to sort of receive mental health or study it or see it from a distance or even with their close friends and family.
Yeah, absolutely, brother. And so, like, I'll give you an example of why education is so important. I'll give you two examples. The first one is the language we often use around mental health. You often find that when someone talks about mental health, they synonymously use those words with mental illness. So, I do an activity when, at the start of courses and sessions that we run, we're actually asked participants, to tell me one thing that comes to mind when they think of their physical health. And they list these whole bunch of things which often are associated with positive things, their muscles, exercising, even when we talk about illnesses, we don't really internalize them, diabetes, cancer, etc. They're often seen in a positive light. Whereas when I tell them, tell me what comes to mind when you think about mental health, from the get-go, people start talking about depression and suicidal ideation, self-harm, anxiety attacks. They tell me about psychosis, etc. And we see the difference in the language, because when we talk about mental health, we're actually not talking about mental health. We're actually talking about mental illness. And then we kind of ground individuals back in the conversation that is more than the absence of illness or the absence of disease. We know that the World Health Organization, for example, it defines mental health as a state of well-being in which the individual realizes their own ability. So they have that self-realization, that self-awareness. They can cope with the normal stresses of life. So the definition of mental health actually validates the idea that life is full of struggles, and we need to learn ways of coping and navigating through those struggles. It also alludes to the point that mental health actually, it relates to the fact that a person can work productively and fruitfully and is able to make a contribution to their community. So we see, like, the definition, there has to be the shift in our understanding or the way we've been conditioned to think about our mental health. There needs to be that shift. And, different individuals are, pursuing their own efforts in shifting that narrative. And one, we believe, being in the education space, and we've all gone through schooling, the power of knowledge in shifting that narrative is something that we really believe in and something that we're really kind of focusing on. And we're trying to pursue that.
It's interesting you say that, because when automatically it's true, as soon as you think or someone asks you about mental health, you're never going to say positive things. More so because it's something you physically can't see. And sometimes you probably forget the days where you feel like you had, if you were going through, sometimes if you're struggling a lot, and then sometimes you might forget the days you had good positive or mental health, or your mental well-being was healthy at that point. So automatically when you think of mental health, even when we did our mental health campaign, we did it over a couple of weeks, but we always spoke about was the illnesses, and we spoke about depression, we spoke about anxiety and all the rest of it. But sometimes you don't think about like the positives that come with a good mental health, or the days that you were good, or
Absolutely.
how they were good on that day. So it's interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Even embracing, I want to cut in yet, even embracing, the normal aspects of mental health, I guess, struggles. You mentioned the word anxiety, kind of shifting the idea that, or validating the idea that, everyone feels anxious at times, and it's actually a human response. It's an innate human response. Just kind of, mentioning that, or kind of walking individuals through, what anxiety is on a physical level and a psychological level, really validates that. Hold on, it's okay to kind of feel down at times.
Yeah,
and it's
I guess
extremely powerful.
it's normalizing it as well. So if someone is experiencing this the depression or anxiety, to then add on the fact that they think they shouldn't be experiencing it and it's a problem, it adds on to an already occurring problem. So if you then come along and say to them, look, it's normal, it's like a normal illness you're going through, it's like a cough and a cold. It's normal for a human to go through a cough and a cold every now and again. And you're gonna once in your life experience it. So as a human, to then say, okay, depression is maybe normal, or the symptoms of depression or symptoms of anxiety or feeling anxious itself is normal, is healthy. It's like a healthy response, I guess, to a situation which you're going through.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And you mentioned that the cold or the cough. When we think about the physical illnesses, we often associate them with them not being necessarily fixated. So if you want to imagine, they call this the mental health continuum, that our physical health lies on a continuum from illness all the way up to health. So positive health and then illnesses. But when we kind of talk about mental illness, so our physical illness, we understand that it moves from illness to health all the time, and that it's not necessarily something fixated, especially if someone's ill. But when we speak about mental illness, we often affiliate that with fixed states. So if someone says that, I was diagnosed with clinical depression, we don't think about them as ever getting better. We think about them as labeling them and writing them off and casting them to the side. That there's a fault, there's something unfixable in this individual. And I guess shifting the idea that there's treatments, there's evidence-based treatments out there which can move someone from that state, is very, very empowering and enlightening.
Yeah, it changes the whole narrative, I guess, of labeling and the problem itself. So let's talk a little bit. I mean, I'm not sure how it works in Australia, but in the UK, I don't even know how it works in the UK, to be honest. But when it comes to teachers and educating them on mental health, like for me, I think that we spend majority of our youth, majority of our life basically growing up within educating, with your teachers, with your lecturers, with your professors and stuff like that. I mean, so like say you go through in UK, you go through the primary school from the age of maybe 6 or 7 up until you're 10, 11, and then secondary school, and then you go through college. But so you're spending these 7, 8 hours a day with the same teachers over and over again. So they get to know the people themselves. But how, I mean, this was a long-winded way of me asking this question, but are they educated? Is it mandatory for them to receive some form of education on mental health?
Yeah, sure. That's a very, very good question, because there was actually a recent study or a survey that was done amongst teachers, which was part of a broader campaign here in Australia. And it went to show that, in a nutshell, teachers actually felt ill-equipped when it came to responding to mental health issues when it came to young people. Now, just to give a bit of context, when we talk about mental health and young people, mental ill health is actually the most important health issue facing young people in both less and more developed countries. It actually accounts for 45% of the disease burden. So when we talk about disease burden, it's a combination of the morbidity and mortality of an illness, more or less how disabling the illness is. And 75% of mental illnesses occur before the age of 25. So why this is actually extremely important is because we know up until the age of 25, there's so much going on in the life of a young person. They've transitioned from childhood into adolescence, to teenage years, and then transitioning again into adulthood or early adulthood. So that because of the changes that are happening, and mental illness can actually compound or actually affect areas of development when we're talking about physical development, psychological development, social development. So keeping that in mind, when we have the conversation about frontline workers, whether it's teachers, community leaders, spiritual leaders, there needs to be definitely an overhaul in how they're educated or how they perceive or understand mental illness, especially amongst young people. And going back to the teacher survey, so that the findings suggested that there was an they were underprepared for numerous reasons. And I guess, having gone through the system myself, being bombarded with all sorts of responsibilities as a teacher, whether it comes from lesson preparation, whether it comes from all the background logistics and all the admin related stuff, whether it comes to assessment and reporting. There's a whole bunch of responsibility thrown on the plate of a teacher, and on top of that, they're also seen as an accidental counselor, or as someone that needs to be ready to respond to any welfare issues that a young person presents with. So it's a lot to digest, and I guess there definitely needs to be greater awareness. And I'm glad that the system itself is, here in Australia, there was actually a release which stated that all teachers by the year 2026 will have some type of mandatory mental health training. Obviously, whether it's effective or not, rolling it out on a mass scale isn't the question. But we don't know if that's going to be effective. But I guess the main point being that it is slowly becoming more recognized, and having teachers trained or at least equipped with skills, because even if we look at young people that face illness and the young people that access services, there's a massive gap. So the role of a frontline worker, like a teacher or like an imam or a community leader, their role becomes just as important as the role of a therapist, a psychologist, in my humble opinion, because they're the ones bridging that gap. Because of the stigma and all the other barriers that someone faces from accessing services, the teacher or that person takes that young person or the individual in general and bridges the gap with those services and breaks down any barriers that they might face.
Especially at that age, because when you're going through the primary school and you're going through secondary school, sometimes you might be experiencing mental health issues and you might not even know. Like, they're not mature enough to understand that what they're going through is something that they can receive help for. So when you have these people in place, even the teachers, if they can recognize certain things, like even trigger words, or they can recognize certain mood swings, or this person's a bit different today and it's for a reason, like we've been taught, we've been educated within the first aid training, this is something that we need to pick up on as a red flag, we can then put them forward towards counselling, or we can put them towards the right people so they can receive treatment. Because if that gap's there, then it's only going to progressively get worse for these, especially if you're experiencing it through primary school or secondary school or college, then it's only going to get build up and get worse. I guess so. There does need to be some form of training, I think, when it comes. And
that's when. Yeah, absolutely. To add on to that point, like when we talk about mental health literacy, that's exactly what it is. It's the knowledge and beliefs about mental disorders which aid their recognition, management, and prevention. So someone's ability to recognize the disorder, knowledge about risk factors, protective factors, and self-help strategies, and information about professional help and where to seek that mental health information from. And when we talk about protective and risk factors, when we talk about, especially amongst the boys, for example, amongst my circle of friends or my family, even knowing that I'm in this space now, sometimes, raises some eyebrows, like, why the hell would someone get depressed? Or why the hell would someone, face an anxiety disorder? And then having to explain, sometimes even having to explain that can become even more frustrating, because you're not beating around the bush, but we know from the literature, and if you go to, whatever research paper, there's never one factor that contributes to someone developing a mental illness. It's always a complex interplay between different risk factors that contributes to a mental illness. So even kind of, breaking down the barrier and explaining that to individuals can sometimes become even more frustrating. But you can understand why, trying to spread that awareness and increase the literacy is so important.
Yeah. What about within imams? Have you noticed? So I guess you've been doing this since 2018, so it's been about 4 years, 4 years so far. What's the biggest thing you've seen? Like, has there been a lack of education within the imams itself? So I'm guessing when it comes to teachers, they've got some sort of background in education. They're a teacher, so they receive education within the country that they've been brought up in. So mental health, it gets mentioned along the way, whereas imams, like, they might have, when you approach an imam, say I was going to approach an imam mental health, the first thing I think of is they're going to direct me towards the Quran. They'll tell me this, they'll tell me that, but I guess that's not enough for somebody experiencing these sort of issues. So they more so, I feel, should also be trained. What have you noticed there when it comes to that is there a big gap between their lack of understanding within the mental health and teaching and training?
Yeah, absolutely. I might start off by mentioning when it comes to imams specifically, we've actually had the honor of partnering up with the Australian National Imams Council, which is the peak body for imams in Australia. And they, imams play such a vital role within the community. I think when we have conversations like this, it's very easy to kind of cast them aside and render their role irrelevant when it comes to addressing welfare issues of congregants or people within their care. I think we need to kind of embrace them as a key resource rather than to kind of cast them aside. Research, the papers that have been published have reaffirmed the important role that they actually play. So I was actually listening, I was part of a focus group where we had to kind of provide feedback on a podcast that was given by an individual who plays a role. I can't remember his name escapes me right now, but he's one of the he's been contracted by Living Works, which is an international organization that focuses on suicide prevention training. And he was talking about the important roles that faith leaders play within their communities. And in one of the studies and surveys that he picked up on, he actually mentioned that at least 25% of people will consult a ministry leader before they approach a mental health professional. There's a massive expectation that from congregants and from the community that faith leaders are able to deal, or at least direct and embrace the conversation when it comes to a mental health issue, or even a critical incident around, for example, someone experiencing suicidal thoughts or in a situation as such. And then he goes on to actually mention that our faith leaders are generally under-equipped, and it's only when they're faced with the issue that it becomes something that they want to focus on. And through our, limited interaction with imams, so we've actually ran a mental health first aid training session, so a generic one, and we also ran a half-day suicide prevention workshop with them. And one of my reflections on them is that there definitely is a gap.
How tough was that, teaching the teachers?
At the beginning, I felt it was very intimidating. These are the people that I grew up obviously listening to, and it was here kind of giving back to them. So it was actually a very humbling experience because, it felt like it wasn't just about taking from them, but it was also kind of giving back in that way. And I guess one thing that struck a chord in terms of reflections was there was definitely, the whole idea that they're undertrained in the space, especially when it came to crisis intervention. So a lot of the conversations around what to do, just very basically around the conversation if someone is suicidal, for example, asking them directly, what the particular warning signs are, and actually communicating to them that there's more than just a label. The conversation shouldn't just stop there. There's ways of engaging. There's skills that need to be learned in engaging with with individuals when it comes to these conversations. And I guess, one strength that we have, or that faith communities have, is that value of togetherness, that sense of community, that idea that as part of, my value as a Muslim is my concern for the welfare and the well-being of others. So kind of, recognizing this is extremely important because we can actually take advantage of this. Obviously being brought up in a liberal society where there's so much focus on the individual, breaking those barriers in a conversation around mental health and speaking about the importance of community and social connections is something that we can take advantage of in our faith communities, and something that we need to better embrace.
The reason why I asked that, actually, because when we started our campaign, we was looking for a panelist for our mental health discussion, and it was a Q&A, and we asked many imams whether they were in our community, the outside community. We asked a few, and every single one said that they wouldn't feel fully equipped to talk about such an issue, and they would probably we would be better off getting someone who had experience within mental health itself, or like a psychologist. And I said that, I couldn't disagree. I said to him, that's perfectly fine. Obviously, not feeling comfortable, you're not feeling equipped, and it's a separate issue in itself. But I felt like there was a massive lack of, I couldn't find anyone in the end to come along, like an imam in itself, to give that perspective on it. But I just felt like we were let down slightly because all it took was is education. And I didn't think about myself at that point, or the panel or discussion. I was thinking that, what if this person was approached by someone who was going through it? What response would they then give to the person who? You can't say the same thing to them. You can't say, "Oh, I'm not well equipped on this. Find somebody else." You can't turn the person away at the time of need. So what do you do? So at that time, I was thinking, education for them, or mental health education in itself, is massive. Like, it needs to be up there with, like, everything else. If you're spending a couple of hours a day with students who will definitely be going through something or another, especially at the moment with the times that we're in, then you need to be educated on these sort of issues and mental health and stuff. It's quite important.
Yeah, absolutely. That first responder training, or the idea of first responder training, or training for people that are natural helpers, that was a term that I was recently exposed to, is extremely paramount. Very, very important. And I couldn't agree anymore with what you've mentioned, mashallah.
Have you found, I'm not sure if you work with different communities or different cultural backgrounds or different religions, ethnicities, but between, like, say, within the multi-ethnic background and, let's say, the Western world, is there a massive difference between the education differences on mental health?
I guess interacting, this, when it comes to addressing issues around mental health, there's a lot of commonalities across different communities that we've noticed when it came to, especially young people, when, a lot of them, embracing the pressures of society. There's the whole social media issues that have come up as well recently. A lot of the issues are common, and although some of the barriers are unique to different communities. So, for example, interacting with the Muslim community, you're able to kind of delve a lot into breaking down, some common beliefs around misconceptions when it comes to faith and mental illness. You're also kind of having to kind of zone in on different cultural groups within the Muslim community because of their different understandings around, emotions, or, vulnerabilities around one's mental health. So although, there are definitely commonalities across different groups, there are also unique barriers or conversations that happen within different groups as well.
Yeah. So we were just talking about faith and mental health, and I know you said at the beginning, you spoke about it on the One Network, the video I've already seen. What have you found? Like, so, I remember I spoke about it with Bilal Zia as well, brother, and we had this similar conversation, and we were talking about, is being a good Muslim, or good Muslim, should we say, and having a positive, or like a good mental well-being, good mental health, are they mutually exclusive? Like, if you understand my question.
Are they two separate things, or
are they two separate things?
Yeah, absolutely. So just to kind of put a plug here, and I have no affiliation in any way, sort, or manner. There's when it comes to Islamic psychology, I think there's some fantastic work that's going on around the world. From what I've been exposed to, and I had the honor of actually meeting Dr. Rania Awad online just for some discussions in a meeting. She's doing some fantastic work with Yaqeen Institute and the Stanford Muslim Lab at Stanford University in the US, and they recently actually released a series called Holistic Healing. So they talk about how Muslims, for example, developed the first psychiatric hospital, and how classical Muslim scholars addressed issues of the mind, body, and soul, and the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ's approach to mental health and mental illness. So yeah, she does a phenomenal job as a qualified psychiatrist, and also a scholar within the Islamic tradition in bridging that gap. So kind of redefining the frameworks of Western psychology to actually fit within an Islamic paradigm is something phenomenal, and definitely something that I'm not qualified in. Although when it comes to broader conversations around faith and psychology and breaking just simple barriers down, it's been extremely important. So when it comes to faith and mental health, or faith and mental illness, and this was something I mentioned on that video on the One Path channel, it was actually an experience when I ran the course for imams and community leaders, where I actually had an imam reach out and mention, the first thing that they mentioned was, my father destroyed me. I think I have mental health issues. That was the message that was sent.
Wow.
And I quickly reached out. We had a psychologist on the team. And I said, look, it seems like this is outside of my scope. Would you mind kind of stepping in and just kind of understanding what the issue is? And then when I went back, it was mentioned that I prefer to speak to you because I don't want to speak to any professional. I'm scared that, word will get out or I'll have a black dot on my name under the system. So I kind of speaking to them and just kind of understanding what the issue was. It stemmed from childhood abuse, childhood neglect. It followed them all the way through to adulthood. So despite them going to prestigious Islamic institutions to memorize the Quran and the Ahadith, and now they're leading prayers and giving sermons in the mosques and whatnot, they're still impacted by the issues that happen to them. And from the external, we'll often view this guy as someone that's knowledgeable, which he is, mashallah, and has it going for him in terms of his deen component. But at the same time, he was struggling a lot when it came to his mental health, and it impacted the way he'd interact with congregants. He didn't feel confident, and he always felt low self-esteem because of how he was treated. Although he was intelligent, a young intelligent person, growing up and being constantly barraged with abuse and words of bringing him down all the time, meant that he grew up now not feeling very secure because of that childhood experience. So when we talk about, and from the outset, definitely needed, he needed to speak to some type of professional expert. But from the outset, and I don't mention this to kind of, say that, imams, are a write-off or whatnot. Please don't mention that. All I'm trying to do is break down that barrier that exists between, someone, who can gain their Islamic knowledge, and then also someone that might be struggling with their mental health. And they're definitely, in that respect, not mutually exclusive. From that video, I actually had another person reach out to me and contact me the next day saying that, Jazakallah khair for, what you mentioned in the video. I also have a similar experience where, I went overseas and studied for 5 years, my deen, etc. And when I came back, because of my experience with childhood abuse, it was something that I struggled with. And then I'd go to my teachers and they'd say that, this is a trick of shaitan, for example. And that kind of, it really knocked him off. After 5 years of study overseas, it really knocked him off. And he had to come back and kind of work through his issues, all those issues that, in one sense or another, kind of was out of his control, especially when we're talking about someone's experiences during childhood. But it was compounded by the lack of awareness within our faith communities, whether it's on a grassroots level or whether it's on, amongst the level of our community leaders and our faith leaders. So definitely something that we need to broaden the conversation with. And to add one last bit to this, even when you go and discuss protective factors, when we talk about what are things that protect or give, protect someone from developing a mental illness, faith is often mentioned at the forefront of that conversation. And as Muslims, we know that our faith, our iman, our deen, our adhering to the teachings of the Prophet ﷺ, that plays a massive role in our overall health and well-being. And when we talk about life as a struggle, and before I mentioned what the World Health Organization mentions about being able to deal with the stresses of life. And then when we kind of see how that's manifested in our Islamic teaching, where the Prophet ﷺ, he describes this world as a test, for example. Allah describes it as a test in the Quran. And then, and the reward, the reward for someone that endures those hardships and is able to navigate through them. We know the hadith about how, paradise is surrounded by trials and tribulations. So kind of validating those concepts using our faith traditions goes a long way in our overall well-being as a faith community, but also this concept of healing. People navigating through, their own issues, finding comfort in the deen, in prophetic teachings, in listening to these conversations from our preachers and our Islamic mashayikh and mashayikhat is so crucial. And I think something that we need to, that I think it's slowly becoming the norm now, to really be able to address them and have some type of emotional intelligence when we're conversing about the struggles that day-to-day Muslims might face.
I think there's so many teachings as well, if we're listening to them, that we can use from the traditions, what a lot of the prophets went through, Prophet Muhammad SAW himself, using the stories as motivation. Like, they went through it, and they went through it on scales which are unimaginable in this day and age, I think, but the struggle is the same. So the concept of the struggle is the same. So we can use that, or we should use them, I feel, as tools into improving our own mental well-being, along with the secular stuff that's going on. And it needs both. It's like and I asked a question once to somebody, a psychologist, can you get treated just with medicine, mental health? Can you treat it just with medicine? No, you need to go through therapy, you need to go through CBT and all the rest of it. Whatever is appropriate at the time, you need to go through it. It's like with treating this, I feel like you can use both. You should use the stories from back in the day, from the traditions and the prophets, to also use as tools to improve our mental health, which you can do yourself as well. There's so many things out there at the moment now, especially online. There's so many stories which you can use and find, and they always equate just to help them make you feel better even in that moment. It's a feel good factor even in that moment.
SubhanAllah. That's a beautiful one. And just to kind of one thing that popped up into my mind right now was, I guess one of the reasons why I actually reached out to Dr. Rania, who mashallah is she's a public figure, an international figure in the space. And one of the reasons I reached out was, working in the mental health education space, you realize that there's a blueprint, or like a reference point when it comes to mental health literacy and awareness. A blueprint for change is to increase mental health literacy. And one of the questions I actually asked was, do we have a blueprint or something documented when it comes to Islamic psychology / Islamic or mental health literacy within Islamic audiences that we can maybe adapt to meet the needs of the community, the Muslim community, to better equip them, or to infuse the idea of spirituality within the conversation around mental health. When we look at work that's being done in indigenous populations, amongst the indigenous populations, so in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander populations, around healing and around addressing mental health issues and the conversations around that. And one thing that the community, the indigenous community and the academics have done is they've actually given a whole different framework to understanding mental health. And they've infused the notion of spirituality in understanding mental health and overall well-being. They don't even use the word mental health as often when they're talking about this conversation, because for them as a community, it's much more than that. The infusion of spirituality and those teachings play a massive role in the overall well-being. So I guess kind of tailoring an approach, and this is something I take a personal interest in, is to kind of, inshallah, one day somehow connect or collaborate with individuals all over the world around developing some type of blueprint that's accessible to the layman. Because when we're talking about education, the information is one thing, and this is a big point I want to make. The information that we speak is one thing, but communicating that is a whole different science. It's an art. The concept of connecting with an audience and tailoring and differentiating content and conversations to different audiences requires, the skills of educators and teachers. And I think that's something, hopefully, inshallah, we continue to move forward with, is this idea that it's not about what you say, but how you say it and how you connect.
Yeah, just because you mentioned Dr. Rani, we got in contact with her for our mental health, but we never managed to. The timing was a bit off at the time. However, I've just pulled up her Instagram here because I saw something yesterday which she released. Actually, it's called "Coping with Pandemics in Islamic History," and she's written an article on that, which I think would be quite good because it's taken the Islamic perspective on what happened. Just because it clicks in my mind that we're talking about stories from the traditions and people can use that. Well, she's taken the traditions and the Islamic history from them and brought it to basically exactly what we're going through right now. So it is out there. It takes people to bring it out, and people like Dr. Rani herself, to Allahumma barik laha, to bring these papers out, and people can use them. It's so accessible now at the moment.
Mashallah, yeah, amazing work. Even like when she talks about how she translated the manuscripts from early Islamic scholars, which kind of triggered, I believe, the flow of events around, these conversations from her end was just wow, mashallah.
Yeah,
May Allah
no,
subhanahu wa ta'ala
mashallah.
preserve her and
I
preserve
mean,
the other Muslims working in that space.
I just wanted to talk a little bit about a couple of scenarios, and like I say, someone was going to approach you. However, I just wanted to talk about having a purpose firstly before we get into that. So sometimes, like I feel like you could, especially at the moment, why I want to speak, it's more relevant now than ever, especially with Corona. People here, it's worse than Australia. We're in lockdown at the moment, so nothing's open. Shops aren't open. Everyone's at home. You educate from home. Your universities from home or school and all the rest of it. So how much does creating a purpose now for us within the UK, or say growing up as students, waking up with a purpose in your day, how much will that affect, or not having a purpose, how much will that affect your mental well-being?
Yeah, it's a very good conversation to have. I guess may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala firstly alleviate you guys in the UK
I mean,
being in lockdown, and the prevalence of COVID within the UK, is way above what we're facing here in Australia. Alhamdulillah, we've been blessed in that regards. I
alhamdulillah.
guess the importance of having a purpose. I guess firstly, I think it's important to kind of validate, feelings of, feeling worthless or feeling down in such a turbulent time. When we had the lockdowns, similar lockdowns here, a lot of mental health organizations released articles about coping, and I think one of the most things, one of the biggest things at the forefront of the conversation was, making sure that you validate your feelings of low, or, those low feelings, and the fact that this, because of so much uncertainty, naturally our anxiety increases. So, and they might be up to abnormal levels. So I think that starting from this is very, very important in terms of having a purpose, and using different things to your advantage. I guess one quote I like to hold on to when it comes to purpose is, the bigger the why, the easier the how. Purpose is everything. Whether it's the purpose of your existence, or what you're doing, for example, as a student, in your university degree, connecting to the why makes the day-to-day functioning a lot easier. So yeah, in terms of purpose, I think it's a driving force when it comes to getting someone through those turbulent times, because it's not just about your why getting you through those easier times, but it's also getting through the more difficult times, and I think that's where it serves the utmost purpose. Allahu alam.
Okay, perfect. I just wanted to ask you two scenarios now.
Sure.
They're not difficult scenarios. You're just basically, just to give the listeners, let's say this happens, it's real life. So if this happened in their life, how do they react? So the first one is, someone approaches me and vents about anything. What do I do?
Oh, that's a very good question. So someone vents. I think it's important to acknowledge that there's a certain level of trust and comfort that someone has to actually approach you in that regard. So I think the first thing you do, obviously, is to kind of listen up. A basic skill that we often think is easy, but it's actually hard in hindsight. There was actually a small activity that Tariq, one of the co-founders, shared with me that he was doing, and he mentioned to me this was probably one of the hardest activities he's done. So he was paired up with someone, and he had to ask the other person, "How are you?" And he had to keep quiet for 2 minutes straight without saying a word, and just listen to the person. And he said it was very difficult to do, and
Yeah.
I urge listeners to maybe try doing that one day, because what that does, naturally as human beings, when we're told something by someone, one of the first responses is to try and relate to that using your own experiences, and inadvertently you actually might start making the conversation about yourself. So in the process of listening, whether it's a lot more than just listening with your ears, it's also listening with your words, listening with your body language, and keep being mindful that if someone is going through a difficult time, as a bare minimum, you need to keep the conversation about them. If you need to insert something about your experiences, do so, but redirect that back to them and say that, it might have been different, but, I hope you don't mind me sharing, what happened to me when I went through that rough patch. And using those personal lived experience conversations to connect with the person can be sometimes extremely powerful. So yeah, for sure. So if someone vents, make sure that you listen, and try and kind of gather, whether this falls within the normal struggle, like the zone of normal, or if it seems to be something outside of your scope that you can assist with. Because it's very important, kind of deciphering where you want to take this is important. You need to have a direction with the conversation you have with someone that comes to you and opens up. It's not just about having a willy-nilly conversation. And I might give mental health first aid a plug and all these first responder trainings, because what they actually do is they give you purpose to your conversation. They give you a direction. They give you a framework. It's not just about having the conversation and, being effective, saying, oh man, I wish I could do this and help the person in that regard. No, you're going in knowing that this is your starting point and this is your finish point. And you only operate within these 2 points. Now, things that fall outside of your scope, you wholeheartedly and confidently admit that it's outside your scope. Not to say that, if it's something that they need professional help for, that you don't help them at all. You continue to engage and support them, but you just know that you don't tread in that territory. And that was, one of the biggest realizations that I came to when I did the mental health first aid training as a participant myself. It was about, reflecting on incidents beforehand. When I'd engage with young people or even adults, it was always trying to provide a solution. I was very solution focused in my conversations. It's like, it's so obvious, just do this and do that, and that's it. And I kind of invalidated all the other factors, like what it was, other factors that might be contributing to the problem, whether it was their own genetic makeup or their personality or their family history, or in any other environmental factors. So inadvertently, what I was doing, it was a very selfish way of helping, because I always thought it was about me imposing my expectations on the person. But in hindsight, when we're counseling and supporting others, it should always be about the person. And we know, the Prophet ﷺ, I love using this scenario and just reflecting on it. It's so powerful. About the lady that came to him complaining. I believe it was it's in Shama'il at-Tirmidhi, when, and I'm just paraphrasing here, the incident when the lady came up to the Prophet ﷺ, asked in a state of distress. And when the scholar that was narrating it mentioned, you could even say that she was facing some type of mental illness. And what the Prophet ﷺ did, he didn't actually respond by saying, it's okay, you have faith, you have iman, this is such an irrelevant thing, what's the issue? The Prophet ﷺ, he actually said, okay, pick anywhere in the streets of Medina so we can sit down and have a talk about it. The Prophet ﷺ, in that moment, he responded to the distress of the lady. He kept it about her. He didn't make it about him or imposing, his solution to that particular issue. So when we talk about active listening, and when we talk about, responding to someone's distress and them wanting to vent, I think it's very, very important that we keep in mind all those things. So listening to them actively, making that about them, and using the prophetic example. We talk about this in very abstract terms when we're doing courses, especially to the wider community, but there's so much value that we can take from looking at how the Prophet ﷺ responded to these situations. And the other situation that, that comes to mind is, when the bird, Ya Aba Umayr ma fa'ala an-Nughayr, what happened to your bird? The little boy that was, that was next to the Prophet ﷺ, near to the Prophet ﷺ, I think the bird either died or flew away and he was upset. The Prophet ﷺ came down to his level and kind of asked him what was wrong and tried to comfort him in that way. Or the narrations of the young girls that would grab the Prophet ﷺ and walk him through Medina. He just let them take him where they wanted. So kind of giving that love, that affection, that attention to them that they needed, depending obviously on their different states. And those 3 different incidents, we can dissect them and just speak about them and really use them as motivation, for a long time if we could.
Yeah, because all reasons because there were reasons why they were done. The two things I want to mention, actually, funny you mentioned boundaries, actually, because a hadith I mentioned, read not long ago, saying that, I think it was a hadith dua transcript, said, may Allah bless the one who understands what level he is upon, or understands where his boundaries are, and he sticks to them as well. So that's the first thing. And secondly, we're talking about active speaking. There was a brother I spoke to not long ago, and it was on a talk, actually, and we asked him a question, and we said, like, what do you do when someone approaches you like this, and how do you listen to them? And he said, the first thing I do, I take them to the local takeaway and I sit down with them and I say, you've got 10 to 15 minutes. Well, I say you've got 15 minutes to talk and I'm not going to do any talking. You sit there and talk. So this person, they start talking, 10 minutes go by, and then the 10 minutes go by and he's got 5 minutes left. So then the brother looks at him and says, okay, you've got 5 minutes left to talk. I'm not going to. So he sits there for 5 minutes. That's it. And then the person keeps thinking, what else can I talk about? And they keep talking. They keep venting. They keep saying. So then he says to him afterwards, okay, what do you want to do? And he said, they say, to be honest, I feel a bit better now. Anyway, so we'll see how it goes. And he said, all it showed, that was the power of listening. He said, I didn't even say a word. I didn't say anything. I sat there 15 minutes and I made sure that person talks for the full 15 minutes. And I didn't have to say a word after that. And that was it.
Subhanallah.
That's so it's the power of just listening.
And it reminds me of the analogy I once came across, and it spoke about, everyone carries something called a stress bucket. Okay, so imagine this was a bucket or a cup, a stress cup, and you have different things that add to the stress cup. So just imagine, like, family stuff, stress, work stress, university stress, etc. So some individuals actually have ways of emptying the stress cup, whether it's through sport, whether it's through therapy, whether it's talking to someone, and sometimes our cups might become so full with stress that at that tipping point, speaking to someone can take a massive load off of them. So just imagine that the cup empties, and that, in that situation, that's what it reminds me of, that at someone's breaking point, listening can become extremely powerful. SubhanAllah.
It's like they say, problem shared is a problem halved, as the saying goes. So scenario 2 is, I can tell someone is feeling, or they look a bit off, they look like they're not the same person again. What do I do in that instance?
I guess, so when you say they seem a bit off in terms of their mood, what
it could be their mood, it could be the way they're acting, it could be they're not replying to text messages as they usually are. As in, the question is basically directing, do they approach that person?
Yeah, I think depending on your proximity to the person, I think obviously being the judge of that, know that you play a very important role in sussing them out, if you want to use those words. I don't know if you use that slang in the UK.
We do.
Oh, you do? Okay, that's good. So I guess, just kind of, instead of going in with any assumptions, just go in and actually try and understand what the reality is. And asking how are you, or are you okay, goes, there's Are You Okay Day here in Australia. They have like a whole campaign around that. It's an annual event, and it's an organization that runs a massive thing. It's one day a year, but nonetheless, the value of that has, it's such a big thing. Are you okay? Ask, the power of asking, are you okay? So I guess if someone is feeling down, linking back to the first point, listening to them and just understanding what the issue is, there's a lot. It means so much to someone who's in a dark place if someone goes out of their way to check on them. And you often, there's a lot of people that share their lived experience online. And one of the most powerful lived experiences I've heard, maybe because of how many times I've listened to it, is the lived experience of Tariq, one of the co-founders of Educate. He shares his story around his own lived experience, and it was the power of that one friend who he reached out to that literally saved him in terms of, subhanAllah. So, and I'm sure we can relate to it. I know for me personally, when it comes to, feeling off, on, not being in that healthy headspace for extended periods of time, having, someone that I can fall back on, whether it's my mentors, my wife, but having those select individuals becomes extremely important. And it's very important that you think about who you can fall back on in times of ease, because part and parcel of some of the symptoms of depression and anxiety is that you feel helpless, or the help negation kicks in, that you feel like there's absolutely no help and no one can help you. And subhanAllah, that's part and parcel of certain symptoms. So it's very important that you identify who your support network is, ASAP, so that you know that you can fall back on that particular person when those issues do arise.
Okay, I've only got one last question for you, to be honest. I know you've got babysitting to go to. I don't want to take you from your daddy duties a lot.
Thanks, brother.
So you must get a lot of people asking you for help, or asking you set question on a day-to-day basis with the environment that you're in. Does it ever become pressurized? I know it's a personal question. Does it ever become pressurized upon yourself to take these issues or to listen to them day in, day out?
I think that's a very good question, because I guess one thing that we've come to the conclusion, or one of the realizations that we've come to, is building rapport and a presence on a grassroots level. Naturally, people with issues want to open up to you. The fact that they're scared of opening up to a professional, they want to open up to someone who's normalized the conversation. And at times, 100%, it does feel like you feel helpless, that you wish you could do more, but it's outside of your scope. So the best you can do is just to say, access this service or access that service. And Allahu A'lam what happens after that. And sometimes, that really kind of, I guess it does get to us, because we're like, how do we know that they're going to access the service? But obviously it's not our responsibility. But I guess in terms of ihsan and doing things in an excellent way, we're always kind of on the lookout in terms of improving ways of ensuring people access the help. So I guess it's a fine balance. We are, we're definitely kind of, from day dot, we've always expressed the need to adapt to, the needs of communities. So whether that one day means we're going to have, an educated department that focuses on therapy to kind of bridge the gap between people accessing services and not accessing services, is a big thing. But yeah, it's definitely something that we're definitely going to look at. And just to wrap up, actually, I came up with so one of the statistics, just to kind of put things into perspective. I know beforehand you mentioned speaking about male mental health and men's mental health. In Australia, there was actually a statistic, and I'm just going to put the statistic in perspective. If we can imagine, this is going to seem like, oh, why the hell is he mentioning it now? But I'm going to wrap it up and relate it back to the point. If we can imagine that men aged 16 to 24 are represented as 100 people, that analogy, if the world was a village of 100 people, what would it look like? Well, if the village was made up, if the men population in that age group were represented as a village of 100 people, 23 of them, and this is based on the survey from the National Health and Wellbeing, it was an Australia-wide survey, just to give you context, and there's parallels within the data in the UK. So 100 people, 23 of them would have a diagnosable mental illness in a 12-month period. And out of the 23 men that experience those diagnosable mental illnesses, only 3 will seek professional help.
Wow. SubhanAllah.
So 100, 23 will face issues and 3 will seek help. And it's men, when it comes to groups or age group, they're the lowest seeking. So they're the lowest. So they're the group that access help the least. So when it comes to service provision, and that's like, it's really eye-opening, because when we talk about awareness, like you mentioned before, if we're talking about awareness and it becoming overwhelming, that statistic is massive, because a lot of the barriers men face, are rooted within, for example, society's conditioning of them, and it's also rooted in cultural barriers, for example, and what it means to seek help and become vulnerable as a male. So yeah, kind of reconciling that with the pressures that we feel in this line of work can sometimes compound, but it also kind of gives us, for us, it's kind of seeing it from a different angle. It's an opportunity for us to try and bridge that gap, inshallah, and to increase the health and well-being of different population groups.
Barakallah feek. I'm glad you touched upon that. I did want to talk about male mental health, but it's a very, very long conversation in itself.
Absolutely.
So when I planned it out in my head whilst I was talking, I thought I think it's your child is waiting for you, so I better wrap it up quick.
All good, brother.
So barakallah
Jazakallah
feek. It's been a very interesting conversation. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I know we disturbed your sleep on a Sunday morning, and I wish I could say to you,
alhamdulillah, this was this was such an honor. Thank you so much for reaching out from the other
no,
side of the
barakallah
globe.
feek. It's your time more than ours. Like I said, I wish I could say to you, you could go back to sleep on your Sunday morning, but I guess it's not as easy as that being a father. Allah Mubarak.
Yeah, I can hear the toddlers chirping. Alhamdulillah. Jazakallah khair again. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you and the efforts of all your MSA committee and the MSAs around the world. I was part of the MSAs for a long time, and it was one of the most beautiful periods of my life. I really reflect on that a lot, alhamdulillah, and there's so much that you take out of it. So,
I'm final year now, alhamdulillah, so I don't think I'll say I'll miss it for the first year, but second year after that we'll see, inshallah.
Alhamdulillah. No, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept from you.
Jazakallah khair. Jazakallah khair, and jazakallah khair to everyone listening as well. If you can check us out on YouTube at MMU ISOC, and also we're now on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify at the Muslim Interlude as well. And if you want to check out any of Ziyad's work, you can check out Educate. It said on his t-shirt, but we couldn't really see. Do you want to move back a bit? And there we go. Yeah. Educate AU.
Educate AU. Yeah.
Educate AU, and also his Instagram page, Ziyad Serhan. He updates it every now and again with some work he's doing as well.
So
thanks
for the plug, brother.
Barakallah feek, and inshallah we will definitely catch up soon. Jazakallah khair.
وادعي لي وسلم لي على هذه الأمم